Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just a few general safety announcements before we get started here this afternoon in the Richmond Event Centre. First of all, just take notice of the emergency exits at the back of the room, and if you require any help, there's members of the authority staff in the room. As usual, the event is streamed live on the internet, and again, just make sure your mobile phone is switched off and set to airplane mode. Again, as usual, silence always to be observed, and if you need to leave the room during the meeting, just do so quietly. Again, it's an engagement between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, and you're present to observe. No opportunity for anyone other than the authority and the Garda representatives to participate in the meeting. Just one or two points to note for today. Unfortunately, our chairperson had an accident in the last few minutes. She will be fine, but an authority member, Nessa Lynch, is going to chair the meeting this afternoon. And then the second thing to note is that Sarah Parsons from the Garda Síochána is joining us by way of a call. So when the Commissioner asks her to talk to us, you'll hear her voice coming in, so just to be aware of that. And with that, I'll hand you over to our chairperson for the afternoon, Nessa Lynch.
Thank you very much, Helen. So welcome to the June public meeting of the Policing and Community Safety Authority. So I'm Nessa Lynch, and I'll fill in for Elaine today as she is indisposed. So we have a very busy agenda today, so we'll get into things. But just before we do that, we just want to offer our congratulations to Paul Cleary for his recent appointment as Deputy Commissioner Security, Governance and Accountability, and we're wishing you every success in that very important role. So I will hand over now to Martina for our first item, and Martina is going to be focused on the Q1 performance report for Garda Síochána.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Commissioner, I want to take the opportunity to thank you very much for attending the launch of our Policing Priorities event on Tuesday in Dublin Civic Events Centre. And I suppose it was a really useful event for us to highlight what the policing priorities are that we have identified for Garda Síochána, and also to, I suppose, to give some feedback to the communities that engaged with us in the preparation of those priorities. And I think you'll have got a good sense on the day of how significant an exercise it was for the Policing and Community Safety Authority to prepare those particular priorities. And I suppose the elements that we see as being particularly important in terms of policing delivery over the next period. So I might at the outset just ask you if you maybe might like to comment on how you see those priorities being delivered in the context of this, the first quarterly report that you are preparing for the authority. And I want to thank you and the team for the work that has gone into the preparation of this first quarterly report.
Thank you very much, and may I just at the outset just naturally wish the Chair a speedy recovery. Very sorry to hear that, and thank you very much for your comments on the appointment of Deputy Commissioner Cleary. Obviously, we're delighted to have Paul at the executive team, and I know he's going to be an absolutely fantastic asset to the organisation in that role. And thirdly then, and it obviously feeds into this item agenda, the meeting on the priorities. Thank you for the invitation to that. I was very happy to go down to that, and certainly struck me the amount of work that actually went into that, particularly when I met some of the people, and we obviously did Q&A, and some of the people who were involved in it were there, and it was fantastic for me to see some members of our own organisation there who were interviewed, as well as members of the community. So I thought it was a really, really useful event, and I think one of the things that certainly struck me was the alignment of the work of the PCSA and the priorities with some of my own, and I certainly highlighted some of those at the meeting. So to turn to our own quarterly report. So this is the very first quarterly report under the new setup. So our annual service plan, this is obviously the first one. We, as you will know, we have it divided into three different significant areas: prevent, detect, disrupt crime, protect and support victims and the vulnerable, and then finally safer communities and safer roads. And we also report around resourcing, financial overview, and then around some of our programs. And when we look, if I just concentrate on those three main areas, we have a total of 11 metrics in those that we measure every quarter. And we've obviously, and you will be aware of this, currently at the moment 2 of those are on track, 5 of them are actually overperforming, and 4 are under. So I think my view of it at the moment is we certainly need to look at the ones obviously where we're underperforming in. We need to reevaluate where we're going with those and what extra work needs to be done around them. Paul Cleary, Deputy Cleary is here with me, whose area this falls under. Unfortunately, the head of SDO couldn't be here today, Emer Burke, who's done a lot of the work behind this, as you know. But I might just hand over to Paul just to see has he any, I suppose, additional comments around the quarterly report. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Martina, for the question. So, as the Commissioner says, this is the first quarter of this model. We have 3 annual service plans aligned to our strategic plan for 3 years. And I think the Commissioner's given an overview there in relation to the metrics. And I'll just go a little bit further, if I may, on it. So, under the heading of Prevent, Detect and Disrupt Crime, the benchmarks that we're comparing against are from 22, 23 and 24. So they'll set the baseline, we'll say, of which we're measuring going forward this year. And then the percentage increase or decrease versus that benchmark. And as the Commissioner has said, we are overperforming in some and underperforming in others, and we will certainly be having a look at those areas around cybercrime trends, around road fatalities, and in other areas where we need to improve on. But I think if I can just give some of the metrics fairly quickly there. Under the first group of Prevent, Detect and Disrupt, we have the counts of importation of drugs. We're plus 8% against the benchmark on that. Reported counts of possession of drugs for sale or supply were plus 3% on the benchmark of that. Reported counts of fraud and economic crimes plus 1%, and reported counts of property crimes minus 3%. In addition to that, at a higher level then, we have our ongoing focus in relation to our international collaboration, and that's very important to us. Obviously, you're aware of a number of international investigations targeting transnational crime, and the networks we have built through Impact have proven to be very positive in this regard. We also have joint investigations during this quarter with the PSNI targeting cross-border organised crime through the Cross-Border Joint Agency Task Force. So at a high level with the metrics, that's to prevent, detect and disrupt crime. Under the other heading of safeguarding and supporting victims and vulnerable people, the metrics for Q1 will show reported counts of rape and sexual assault down 7% against that baseline that we mentioned. Reported counts of domestic abuse plus 3%, and the percentage of domestic abuse victims contacted within 7 days is plus 2%, which brings us up to our 80%, puts us ahead.
I might just interrupt you there briefly, Paul. I suppose we've had sight of the data, which is really interesting. I'm just wondering if there's any added insights you'd like to present to us, either yourself or the Commissioner, based on the document.
Yeah, I think what is important to add is under this particular area, we have a couple of new programmes commenced from Q1. One of them is one I'm leading, and it's part of the First Contact initiative that we have. And so essentially, we're going to look at all First Contacts. The first part is I've got approval for the upgrading of 60 station public areas. So in other words, what we want is consistency across the First Contact experience for people that arrive into a station. And as you know, we've 564 different stations, but we're going to start with 60. And what that's going to look like is we're going to have, we're taking down any manifestations, posters or notices that might be on the front window of a public area so that they can see the guards behind it, ensuring they have a working bell and CCTV, that they're going to be painted, decorated in similar colours. We're going to have dedicated information stands for every public area. We're going to have a QR code visible so that people can report their experiences and give a review essentially of the first contact that they've had. So as that has started in Q1, it forms part of that first contact is a priority for us, and I know the Commissioner has mentioned this previously. Also under this heading of the supporting of victims and vulnerable people, we've had the development of a 2-day core CPD training module with University College Cork, University College Limerick on trauma awareness in a policing context, with particular emphasis placed on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, and that's been rolled out under the CPD training programme as well. So that's in addition to the metrics that I've spoke about, that's the ad I have for this quarter, which is the first quarter.
Thank you for that. I might just follow up on that training. You mentioned that it'll be part of CPD. Does that include getting to the people at the front line so that the people who have the first
everyone,
contact?
Yeah, continuous professional development is for everyone.
Okay, and have you a sense of how long it'll take to roll that out?
I don't have a timeline. It has been rolled out. We have started and we have some people in, but I don't have the figures on it yet. I can come back to you with those.
Great. It's a very welcome development. It's something I think that has been brought up by the PCSA previously.
Thank you.
And thank you, Paul. If there's just two things, if I could just add. Obviously, as part of the quarterly report, we report around resourcing. So again, I think there's two separate areas: full-time new Gardaí into the organisation and reserves. And I know we have spoken on a number of occasions around our recruitment and what we're doing and the improvements we're making. So I think it's important that everybody certainly does know that, you know, compared to 2 years ago, we've 500 more Gardaí now in the organisation. And we're very strongly heading towards that 15,000 figure, which will be the highest number in the organisation in many, many years. We are consistently now having intakes at around the 200 mark into the Garda College. And this supports the government commitment of 5,000 new Gardaí over the lifetime of the government. So we're obviously into the second year of this now. And I think, and while this is really, really positive, and I think even our recruitment campaign that just closed the week before last, there was over 4,000 people applied to join the Guard. So again, very, very positive. And last year we had 11,000 over 2 competitions. So very satisfied around that. And I suppose, however, the only, negative that we have reporting in this particular report is around the reserves. So we certainly have a considerable journey to go with reserves. We certainly don't have the numbers we have. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. But it's obviously the same teams of people we're using in our HR section to deal with full-time guards and reserves. So all our focus has been into increasing the numbers into the college. So we're in conjunction with the Department of Justice, Home Affairs and Migration. We're trying to upgrade our plan around reserves. So it's certainly something that I'd be happy to report back again on, but like I say, while the news is generally very positive around recruitment and retention, the reserves is certainly an area that we need more attention to.
Thank you, Commissioner. Again, that's something that we've discussed with you previously, and we'll be really pleased to see progress on.
Yeah, just the third pillar there is the safer communities and the safer roads, and you will have received the metrics around enforcement, so I won't go through them again, but just to add to that then, from the safer communities piece, as you know, in Q1 we're reporting on, we have rolled out our high visibility in Cork and also in Limerick, as well as significantly expanding in the Dublin region as well. For safer roads, and I've mentioned earlier that we do have challenges in this area, but we have made some important, moves forward in relation to enforcement. In the quarter we're speaking about, February, we had a road safety campaign which resulted in the detection of almost 3,500 drivers for speeding offences. It's a daily average of 12 arrests for those driving under the influence of drugs and 13 daily arrests for those driving under the influence of alcohol. In the March road safety campaign, we had the detection of over 5,000 motorists for speeding offences, with 235 individuals arrested for driving under the influence of an intoxicant, and a further 500 detected for mobile phone and seatbelt offences. I think the Commissioner has already covered the resourcing part of it, and the final part under this quarter report is for the finance overview. and the total gross expenditure is 23% of the allocation, and the receipts for that quarter were 29%. That's for Q1. Expenditure 27.44 million under budget profile, principally driven by salaries, EU presidency and fleet, due to profiling and timing of expenditure. The capital expenditure, 3.01 million under budget. That's driven by an underspend in the capital building programme, where fleet and communications, as part of ICT, has incurred an overspend.
Okay.
The EU presidency expenditure is under budget due to the phasing of the expenditure. Sorry.
Yeah, I just might. Yeah, I understand, and as I say, we've read the report. What I'd like to ask is, I suppose, have you, as a leadership team, and the Commissioner in particular, found the quarterly report useful in terms of management of the organisation, and maybe highlight any areas where there were achievements or disappointments? Particularly, I think Paul has touched on a number of the achievements, but areas where maybe you were dissatisfied with progress.
I think the first part of your question, absolutely, we find it useful, and I think the format for me, I'm quite satisfied in, particularly that it's succinct, like it's just running to around 15 pages, so that's particularly useful. It's obviously presented to us by the head of STO as a leadership team, so presented to the senior leadership team, where we spent a significant amount of time discussing it and going through it in a lot of detail. So I think to answer your first question, absolutely, we find it useful. Obviously, the next one will be in September, and then the annual service plan, we've already started to work on that for next year already, because I think you probably all know we were very tight around some of the deadlines this year. But no, so absolutely useful. I think for me, as you rightly said, Paul has highlighted some of the very good things. I think for me, particularly the staffing, the reserve, and Garda staff on the resourcing side are certainly not where they need to be. And then, of course, and I mean, it would be remiss of me not to mention it, but around the road traffic fatality numbers, again, I know it's something that we've spoken about here before, but again, I mean, there are ones that are standing out as more improvements needed around them. Obviously, and I'm very conscious, I just talk about these as stats, but I mean, obviously behind every one of them is, a terrible tragedy and a family terribly affected by it. But I think for me, they're the ones that sort of stand out from the Q1 report.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Just my final question, I suppose, in terms of format and timeliness of the report, I assume this is an iterative process that as it goes on, you'll be maybe looking at how better it might be presented. And I suppose from the point of view of the Police and Community Safety Authority, we'd be very anxious for more transparency between the report and the alignment with our own policing priorities, which I suppose are the key measure from our point of view.
Yeah, look, and I think the key part of all the work that we do in the strategy, the annual plan, the quarterly plan, I think like none of this is is contrary to the PCSA priorities. So I think it's all in line with them. Obviously, they're slightly different when you look at them, but I mean, I think everything, we're certainly aligned. There's none of the priorities from your own work that we would disagree with. And I, look, again, certainly agree with you, it's an iterative process. And as I said, certainly some of the timelines we found a bit challenging, but like I say, we're already working for next year's annual plan already, and the September one for the next quarter. But again, with the new legislation coming in and everything that we went through with that, I think all of these things, the first time you do them, of course, they're going to be more challenging. And as far as the PCSA goes, of course, we welcome any feedback around any of the reports that we provide. We certainly do.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just a final comment, I suppose, to acknowledge the point that Deputy Commissioner Cleary raised in relation to the target on the callbacks for the domestic violence of 80%, exceeding the benchmark that you had identified yourself. Again, an item that's dear to the hearts of the PCSA.
Many thanks, Martina. And just on behalf of the authority, Commissioner, just acknowledging your presence there at the event on Tuesday. And we were reflecting earlier that you're in a job where you have a tsunami of information, and we were really pleased to see you very engaged with the presentation, and you'll have seen the value and breadth of the consultation. So that was very positive for us. And just to remark as well, we're very pleased to see the work on the first contact. So you'll remember at the meeting in Cork that came out as quite an issue, and something definitely that we'd be keeping an eye on. So I want to hand now to Tony O'Brien, who is going to take us through some discussion on the implementation of the Crowe Report related to roads policing.
Thanks, Nessa. Good afternoon, Commissioner and team. So obviously the context of this is arising from a protected disclosure that was made just over 3 years ago, which then resulted in the Crowe Report being commenced to assess and validate each of the matters raised in that protected disclosure, which was commissioned 16 months ago. Sorry, which was published or given to the Guards in March of last year, which is now about 16 months ago. So what we were interested to discuss with you is, over the time span since this first became an issue, what are the concrete steps that the AGS has been able to take to address the issues that were first raised?
Thank you, Tony. So I certainly, any discussions around the Crowe Report, I certainly always think it's important that I start by saying, you know, some of the behaviours that were uncovered by Crowe were extremely disappointing, and certainly wasn't at the level that the public expect from Garda Síochána. So as far as the report goes, obviously in that report there are 8 recommendations. Our implementation plan is to run between 18 and 24 months. So there's three key points of it as far as we're concerned. The first one is to strengthen the oversight around roads policing, to enhance resources and training, and I think probably for me one of the most important parts is to embed a culture of accountability and excellence. So we have put considerable amount of work into the implementation plan, and I know we've shared it with the PCSA, and in fact we've shared all the original reports that we have in relation to it. So the lead for this is undertaken by Deputy Commissioner Coxon, and then obviously below her the Assistant Commissioner with responsibility for roads policing and community safety. So under that, there's been 4 working groups established to work through all the recommendations, and Katrina Gunn is the Assistant Commissioner currently managing that area. And just when I mentioned Katrina, I think it's probably important for the authority just to be aware that Katrina's moving role shortly back to where she had previously worked in as a Chief Superintendent, to work in governance and accountability because of a number of promotions and lateral moves. And a new Assistant Commissioner will be taking over this area. So it'll be Assistant Commissioner Dennis Ferry who will be taking over this responsibility for the Crowe Report. But as Katrina has already done a considerable amount of work around it, we obviously brought Katrina here today. So if it's okay, Tony, I might hand over to Katrina to go through some of the detail of our work. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Tony, for the question. So we have shared the roadmap with the authority, and in relation to that roadmap, we have 4 working groups. We have, and you can really merge PALF and the performance management. And what Crowe called out in relation to PALF was uncertainty with supervisors of whether or not they could discuss, review and follow through on personal obligations and personal organisational goals and personal goals. But it's important in the context of Crowe. The Crowe was commissioned in February 2024, but the analysis of Crowe is carried out from engagement with the divisions, 6 divisions, and that engagement in particular at a point in time across July and November 2024. And at that stage, we did not have the performance regulations. So now we have a legislative framework. We have the Policing, Security, Community Safety Act of 2024 has introduced performance regulations. So start off, we're in a much stronger setting governance, a strengthened governance position for performance regulations. So as Assistant Commissioner of Roads Policing and Community Engagement, we have reinforced the obligations. PALF is mandatory. PALF is a challenge. PALF is challenging in the fact that it's PALF for sworn members and it's PDMS for unsworn members. So what the future looks like in that roadmap is that we're building towards a human capital management tool. And that will be working towards one organisation. And I'm glad to be able to say to you today with confidence that a body of work is being done by the Executive Director of Human Resource People Development, and in that piece progressing the tenders by the end of Q3 2026, so that body of work. But at the moment, in the interim, we have PALF. So what we are doing is, I have monthly tasking and coordination meetings with regional chief superintendents. And at those meetings, they're used to drive enforcement and performance. In particular, the Commissioner has mentioned oversight. I have recently been developing an options paper where it will complement and supplement the existing structures that are there for oversight, governance and accountability. Also, in relation to the drive from, there's two work, the main is the Policing Operations Governance Board, and at Deputy Commissioner level, reinforcing the obligations of PALF, but also looking at that piece of PAF and community engagement superintendents with that oversight will now going forward have that oversight position of all roads policing. There is, we always had superintendents, we always had inspectors over roads policing. However, as a result of that options paper, it's going to be strengthened, and HR are going to do a piece of work in relation to dedicated inspectors having oversight in those positions as we move towards that HR piece of how that is going to be resourced. So it's very important, but it's roads policing is as a result, and it has brought it to the fore. On PAF, it's an agenda item on weekly PAFs with superintendents.
We do, of course, appreciate that cultural change is a long-term process. So I thought it might be useful if we just delved into some of the individual details that were in the Crowe Report, just to see what you could say about progress in those areas. So, for example, when the Crowe team were out on their sampling visits, they noted that in perhaps 30% of the vehicles in which they accompanied RPU members, the ANPR system either was not working at all or took a long time to activate properly. So is that something that you've been able to address in the meantime?
Yes, we certainly have. We've made some significant progress around ANPR, so I'd just ask Katrina maybe to give you the detail of it. And maybe just before I do that, just to re-emphasise one point that Katrina made just around the management of roads policing units. So we have really significant restructure of how that is done, and we only agreed that actually at SLT level earlier in the week. So now all roads policing units, it will be really clear, they're under divisional officer, chief superintendent. There'll be a superintendent who will be given responsibility for each of these units, and as Katrina mentioned, a dedicated inspector. So the way it was, there was no consistency. Some areas had an inspector, so as you can imagine, supervision will be higher. Some areas had an inspector that covered that role as a sort of a portfolio on top of other work. So we're certainly, our intention is to move towards every division will have a full-time inspector. So I think that is going to be a really significant thing, and obviously supervision and how roads policing units have worked is something that was highlighted in Crowe. So just to mention that, Tony, and as I say, I might hand over to Katrina just around the ANPR. Thank you.
Yes, Tony, thank you, Commissioner. Just in relation to ANPR, the Crowe Report called out that ANPR was either not being used, or if it was being used, was ineffectively being used. So what has happened is there's been a 14% increase since 2024, from 129 units to 147 units. In 2024, there was 2.2 million views. That's increased now to 2.7 million views, a 33% increase. But what really has happened, when you're looking at ANPR and tracking and monitoring the piece, it's that cleansing of data. Data has been cleaned. So in relation to the more reliability of the data that we're getting. So back in 2024, with 75,000 hits. We now have 59,129 hits, but that's to do with quality data. And that gives public confidence to those hits for enforcement. So a lot of work has been done in relation to that. Also in relation to the Digital Recording Act, the Commissioner has again complementing and supplementing in relation to that area of work. That's going to be a huge body of work in relation to progressing codes of practice and policy. And again, ANPR, it's very important for our dedication of lifesaver offences. And in relation to that ANPR, we have increases in our lifesaver offences detections. Particularly, I'd attribute ANPR to Section 41's, the seizures, to no insurance, to driving unaccompanied. All of those pieces are, and the data and the quality of data that we're getting in terms of the Motor Insurance Bureau of Ireland. All of that piece has, I hope, gives confidence, not alone to the authority, but to the public, of how seriously we're taking road safety.
Yes, thank you. That's a really concrete change that's occurred. I want to just delve into one other area, and you've kind of referenced it in terms of the command structure changes, but one of the things that was reflected in Crowe, and to be fair, because I'm going to talk about underperformance within policing, and to be fair, they talked about a number of high-performing, a number of average, and a small number of really poor-performing individuals there. But they reflected the frustration expressed by RPU sergeants and inspectors on the grounds that whilst they are aware that certain RPU members may have been deliberately avoiding doing productive work on a routine basis, they felt there was little or nothing that they could do about it. So as compared with when this was done, I'm not, but if I were an RPU sergeant or inspector, would I feel a big difference now? And if so, could you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, no, I think you absolutely would. I think there's a couple of things on that. I think certainly all the attention that has come from Crowe has focused on RPUs, road policing units, and definitely the tone from the leadership within the organisation, myself, right down to chief superintendents, is around what's acceptable and what's not around work productivity. And I think in some ways the Crowe Report certainly called out bad behaviour, but it certainly said, as you rightly said, it was a small amount of people, and there was certainly no organised groups within this. So it was a small amount of poor performers, but as I said right at the start, completely unacceptable. But I think what was somewhat encouraging for me around some of the work that we've been doing on this was some of those high-performing units that you've mentioned, they actually themselves, and some of the ones in some of the other units, expressed their absolute disappointment around some of their colleagues that they tarnished the name and reputation of roads policing units. So I think that was actually a positive that I took out of it. So I think that tone that we're certainly sending, the messaging that we're going down on it, the increased focus on roads policing, so my view certainly is that those sergeants should feel more supported, and I think the increased supervision level. So those sergeants now will have a dedicated inspector to turn to in any of these. Like sometimes they can be challenging, HR issues, whatever. They will now have a dedicated inspector who's assigned to their unit, so they'll have someone there to support them for some of those more difficult decisions and conversations they may have. So I think that's really important. And then obviously Katrina has brought you through some of the work that Yvonne Cook, our executive director, HR, is doing around performance management. So that's a longer term piece of work. But I think a combination of all those, I think to answer your question, I certainly feel that they should feel more supported out on the ground and in divisions.
Thank you. Just my final question really is about the generalisability of all of the lessons from the Crowe Report, given that it's probably unlikely that these things only occurred in one division. So how confident are you that the implementation of these recommendations in the context of RPU will also see performance improvement and methods across the entire organisation?
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's a good point in that, like, I mean, a lot of the work that we're doing around this, it's going to affect all units and all members. It's not just going to affect roads policing. So all our work on performance management, that's obviously going to affect everybody. So if there is any silver lining in all this Crowe report, it is that an improved performance management system will come out of it. And I know I had spoken about it here some time ago, even in my previous roles, around that we needed to do this. But I think Crowe has really given us real impetus around it, given us more motivation to do it. So certainly I think it'll have more widespread effect than just roads policing. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes this topic, but obviously it's something will be of continuing interest to the authority.
Thank you very much, Tony. So, Helen Hall, I know you have a question on this topic.
Just a small supplementary to clarify, Commissioner. You mentioned about a dedicated inspector now in each division, which is really welcomed. Presumably, and I think you mentioned as well that they will now report one of the superintendents, presumably one of the community engagement superintendents in each division. My question is more around probably the role that AC Gun has currently and that will be moving to AC Ferry. Because culturally that's always been a bit of a pull. You know, how much control does the chief super in a division have vis-a-vis the national AC responsible for this area? And when you were discussing the changes, have you had any thoughts on that, or what clarity might be provided to help that situation?
Yeah, I'd nearly think, CEO, you were listening into some of our conversations at SLT level, because we spent a lot of time talking about this and discussing it. And actually, the structure and supervision of roads policing units, it featured, I think, maybe on 3 separate SLTs. There was so much discussion on it, and it was only the one. We have this SLT every week. It was only on Tuesday we came to final decisions around it, because there was so much discussion on it. And it's like a lot of these things. There's pros and cons to doing it both ways. So you can have central control, so you control everything from the centre, or you make it divisional. Now, the op model, the point of the op model was always to make the division self-sufficient within a framework. You know, I mean, those chief superintendents are always supposed to have a level of autonomy. Now, what we certainly see, and one of the things that held us up around making decisions on this, we actually wanted to see the stats of each division, the performance of each division, and the performance particularly in Dublin, because Dublin is slightly different again, because Dublin has divisional units and then they have a national unit based in Dublin. So we actually wanted to break down all the stats around the Dublin Castle unit, how much they contributed. So like I said, there was a lot of analysis and discussion around this, and I think what we've landed on, what we think is best for the organisation, is that divisional structure with oversight from Dennis at that centre. Now the Dublin setup, again, it's somewhat different to everywhere else in the country, so we had to take that into account as well. But like I say, we have put a lot of thought into it, so we're quite satisfied. These new structures, and of course our biggest problem, and it's one that I've spoken about here before, is we don't have enough superintendents and chief superintendents at those ranks. So, you know, this is, and as you've rightly identified, this is a role that we will be given a community engagement superintendent in each division. So he will have community engagement, but he'll also be responsible for this in a division. So it used to be a position where there was dedicated roads policing superintendents regionally and things. We just don't have numbers for that now. And similarly on inspectors. So it's going to be a real challenge for us. Like we have, as I said earlier, there's not consistency. So some divisions already have a dedicated inspector. We have to get some new ones. So it's going to be a challenge for us to get those new ones, because we're right maxed out at our levels allowable for inspectors. But like I say, it's a priority for us. So as with all these things, there's going to be some sacrifices we're going to have to make in other areas. But like I say, roads policing is so important to us. So, you know, and for me, this supervision and dedicated supervision is really the key to sorting a lot of the problems out that we've seen in Crowe.
Thanks, Helen. And just acknowledge you, AC Gunn, as you transition to another portfolio, and thanks for your engagement on this issue, and we'll see you back here in your new role. So, Commissioner, just as we have a spare moment in the agenda, I wonder, it's obviously in the news quite a bit this week about the withdrawal of solicitors' services, and I wonder, could you make a brief comment on the impact on yourselves in relation to that, and any mitigations that you might be putting in place?
Yes, thank you. So obviously this is an industrial relations dispute, if I could frame it like that. So probably not appropriate for me to comment too much about the actual issues themselves. However, we have obviously had to have a plan in place to mitigate, as you say, some of the actions that have been taken. So obviously a lot of cases are being adjourned, so we certainly haven't objected to those adjournments. Where it has certainly affected us is around our planned arrests. So obviously if we plan to arrest people, sometimes we arrest people in dynamic situations, but often we arrest people in planned situations. So we're obviously under difficulty there, because if we arrest somebody and we detain them, and particularly if they make admissions in custody without legal representation, they're obviously open to challenge in any future trial. So planned arrests obviously have been a problem for us. Where we can, we have postponed some of those. And then I think the other thing is, obviously, where we have made some quite significant arrests for the most serious of crimes, obviously those people who are detained, they need legal advice both in the stations and when they go to court. And we have certainly have examples of a lot of difficulty getting legal advice for people who are arrested. So look, I suppose from our point of view, it's obviously not ideal, I mean, to put it mildly, but I mean, we're just working through it as best we can. And I mean, we obviously wait to see what transpires in it all. But I mean, for us, I mean, legal advice for people who are arrested is obviously so important. It's all, you know, the treatment of person in custody regulations, their human rights, everything. All our work for many years has been around making sure people who are arrested, they have proper legal advice when they're in custody. If we plan to arrest people, that we interact with their legal representatives, etc. So, I mean, legal representatives are very, very important part of the work we do. So, they're an absolute integral part of the criminal justice system. So, I mean, from our point of view, I mean, we just obviously watch to see what happens with it. Certainly lots of challenges. Now, what I would say, just to reassure the public, I mean, obviously if something happens, there's something of a dynamic nature. It doesn't affect our Garda response. So guards will still come and arrest people if they do things. So there's absolutely no doubt, there's no question that a dispute such as this prevents us responding to calls, prevents us arresting people. And then if we have to arrest them and we have to deal with the problem of legal advice afterwards, we just have to work through that. But it would not for 1 second prevent us from arresting someone in a dynamic situation. We certainly wouldn't do that. So.
Okay, thank you for that update and that reassurance. So I'm going to hand now to Mick Feehan, who's going to take us through some questions on crime trends and the policing response.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just interested, Commissioner, to hear your own view and, on crime trends as reported, and are there any of those trends that give you sleepless nights or cause for concern?
Thank you. So look, obviously we're looking at the Q4 2025, so the year-on-year reporting. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives in them. So 5 of the 16 offence groups recorded crime fell in them, actually. So, I mean, homicide down 25%, burglary down 13%, robbery, extortion and hijacking down 11%. And I think it's interesting, obviously in different areas they're slightly different, but that one in particular around robbery, while the national average is 11% in Dublin, here it's down 15%. So you know, I think quite positive. I think I mean, you can obviously go through the stats, and I don't intend to go through every one of the different offence categories. But what I would say, I think the areas of concern for me is around, obviously, our fraud offences and our Section 19 reporting. And obviously there is a reservation there from the CSO around some of the reporting on that. And our head of our analytical service, Sarah Parsons, is online. So I'll certainly ask Sarah to talk a little bit about that. And also Assistant Commissioner Willis, who has responsibility for economic crime. So I think to answer your question, that's certainly one area. And I think the other area, and I think just to bring it right up to current date, I mean the Q1 2026 reporting, and there was some media on this today, so this is something we've obviously been looking closely at. The number of assaults on females is up 8% just in that 3-month period. So I think the numbers, absolutely shocking numbers, 2,460 offences in that period. So again, for us, that's something that we have to have a real focus on. So I think if you ask me which ones, certainly that one and the economic crime one. So I think the economic crime one, and particularly around these Section 19 referrals, as we call them, I might ask just Angela. Yeah, certainly, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Thanks, Commissioner. Are you satisfied that the way the crime types are categorised and recorded are fit for purpose, like on Pulse? I think there were 16 crime type headings you mentioned, but do you think that's fit for purpose?
Yeah, look. I mean, I think with Pulse and headings and categories, I think these are things that we've changed over the years, and I think even the way they are now, we'll probably still make changes to them. And I think as different things arise, I think that's only natural. But I might ask Sarah just to come in on that, because I mean this is really her area of expertise. So Sarah, would you be able to address Mick's question?
Yes, good afternoon everybody. Thanks, Commissioner. So I suppose just to give a little bit more context to what the Commissioner was saying there, we have looked at both the Q4 25 and Q1 26 releases from the CSO. Obviously, we're monitoring the crime trends all the time internally and providing those back to the senior leadership team. I think there are some positives in there for us in terms of the reductions. The Commissioner's called out the reductions in robberies in Dublin, but another one that I think has been a really striking long-term trend now is our reductions in burglary and related offences. As we all know, they recorded historically low levels during the COVID pandemic, but we've actually not only been able to sustain those low levels, but go beyond them in thanks to a lot of the work going on under OPTHOR. The categories that the CSO use for publication are slightly different to the ones that we would use internally. But just to speak to your question in terms of the quality, I think we've really improved over recent years in our appetite to take a data-led approach to everything that we are doing internally, and that in itself drives the data quality and the data recording improvements, because so much scrutiny is put onto these incidents that we're finding anywhere where there are any anomalies proactively and going and addressing those. In terms of the Section 19 referrals and our fraud and economic crime overall that the Commissioner referenced, the CSO just report on the crime incidents that have been reported directly by victims. So they are showing just moderate level changes currently. Internally, for our own figures, we're looking at everything, which includes the victim reported and the Section 19 referrals from the financial institutions. So there's been a significant body of work going on over the last 18 months or so that still continues. We are making good progress on them. We do regularly liaise with the CSO to keep them up to date on how that project is moving. We have a permanent fix, if you like, identified, and we are working towards that in tandem with addressing the recording backlog. But others there with you in person may wish to talk on those in more detail. I think the only other thing I think it's worth calling out as something of a positive is the increases we're continuing to see in our weapons and explosive offences. The highest volume type within that is our possession of offensive weapons, and they are any types of weapon that is not a firearm, but most of that group would be knives. So it's very much enforcement led, and I think that's a sign again of the proactive activity and these weapons that are being seized from people.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Commissioner, both you and Sarah mentioned the referrals from financial institutions, and we understand that they have risen steeply in recent years. And I just wondered, is there any way or any method that you can use or solutions to be put in place to reduce the backlog? And what is your estimate of the backlog at this stage?
Yeah. Look, this has been a challenge for us for a few years. So there's a couple of things that we're looking at. So for certain, around some of the thresholds, around some of the amounts. So I might just hand over to Angela Willis AC, because Angela's actually done a lot of the work around this and her team in economic crime. Angela, thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good afternoon. So in relation to the Section 19 referrals, we are an outlier in relation to that mandatory reporting obligation on financial institutions in relation to all fraud. So if we look at the value of the various reports that are made under Section 19, some 84% of them are amounts that are below €1,000. And we know in other jurisdictions that those reports would not be made, and they certainly wouldn't be investigated. However, any victim that makes a report, regardless of the amount, is obviously followed up. So I suppose there are a number of things that we're doing. So the first thing is to get all of the information onto our systems. And you rightly referenced there is a significant backlog at the minute. However, we have worked, as Sarah has said, over the past 18 months, we've worked to significantly reduce that backlog. And even in 2026, we've managed to reduce it by over 14,500 incidents by creating a more automated mechanism from some of the larger institutions that goes directly onto the Pulse system through GISC and the Garda Information Services. So it's not coming into economic crime. It's actually going directly into GISC. They're putting on a skeleton report, but there is sufficient information there then to enable that crime to be allocated locally to be investigated. And it also gives us the ability to analyse the data and to actually see where the commonalities are and where we should be targeting our limited resources in tackling people that are operating at the higher levels of this type of crime. So we know that the internet facilitates the commission of fraud offences. We know that AI is further enhancing the ability of organised crime groups to, I suppose, escalate the level of crime that they can commit, facilitated on the internet. So just in relation to our targeting, and particularly at the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, I'll just give you some information on one operation. So one operation, we have identified over 19,000 people connected to one criminal organisation, and they're operating around the globe. And obviously international collaboration is a key part of our strategy in tackling them. But here in Ireland, we've arrested 782 of that group. We have arrested 129 of them using our organised crime legislation, our gangland legislation, which is really effective and gives us obviously opportunity to detain them, to interview, to examine devices. 513 people have been prosecuted as part of that, and I'm only talking about one organised crime group that's operating. Two convicted for directing a criminal organisation under Section 1 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006, and 14 convicted for participating at various levels in that organised crime group. So I suppose we continue to work with the financial institutions. We were also moving with the support of our internal ICT to move that reporting onto another platform that we use actually for the suspicious transaction reporting. So the GoAmal platform, that's a UNODC platform. We have engaged with UNODC. We see that it's a suitable platform to be utilised. The financial institutions already utilise it for the suspicious transaction reporting. So it's not, it's not a huge change to move the Section 19 reporting onto that. So we anticipate that hopefully early next year we will be in a position that that reporting will come directly into our systems. Then we can analyse it, and as I said, we can identify the highest harm individuals, prioritise our resources there, and then I suppose simultaneously to that, we anticipate that we will engage in relation to maybe having a legislative change that maybe removes that obligation to report the real lower threshold ones, because at the minute something that might be €1 where somebody is testing the system might be treated in the same manner as a much higher one. So if we can concentrate our efforts on that 14% that are above the threshold of 1,000, and we don't know what threshold. In some countries it's 10,000, it could be 7,000, it could be 5,000. But as I say, the important piece here is that's the mandatory obligation by the institutions. Any victim can come to us and report any amount, and we certainly will follow up on that.
Have you an estimate, Angela, as to the number of attempts or what's on the backlog?
So the backlog at the minute is just 61,989 incidents that need to come across on.
So that's going to take a while to work through.
It is, but I suppose this time last year we were at 140,000. So we are working, like it's going in the right direction. And as I said, we've over 14,500 uploaded on this year. So we will get to the end of that. But I suppose GoAmal is we're trying to fix the problem we have in the rear and then fix it forward as well.
And you mentioned the work with the financial institutions. Is there a role for them in triaging these suspicious activities or suspicious transactions before they're reported?
Section 19 puts a mandatory obligation onto them. So they have that mandatory obligation, okay, which is a legislative provision.
Thanks, Angela. If I could just add, maybe just, I suppose, for the benefit, I know the authority will know this, but just for the benefit, maybe members of the public, that big volume that Angela is talking about, many of those are the very common ones that we will all know about, where you get unfortunately, you succumb to a phone message and you pay over money. And sometimes the amounts, as Angela said, can be small, and quite often financial institutions will reimburse people. However, and as you can imagine, many of these ones, particularly at the lower level, people are reimbursed. They don't have an interest in making a criminal complaint about it. However, the way the legislation currently is, we get those as criminal investigations. So all of those. So as you can see, that is real difficulty for us. And the other thing, just to speak about the financial institutions, obviously we've spent a lot of time in the last few years trying to sort out how we would get these reports to us in formats that we can use electronically. Again, some of these things are so complicated. We have different institutions using different systems, different reporting methodologies, all sorts of things. So we've actually spent a lot of time trying to streamline that and try and get them electronically, and as Angela said, try and use some software ourselves to work through them. But like I say, anyone where someone comes in and reports to us, of course we investigate those where people come to us, but many of these ones, that's the type of cases they are. So I just hope that just gives maybe a little bit of nuance to it.
Thanks for that, Commissioner. If I could just move on then to about under-reporting of crimes, and I think we all know that's an issue for policing internationally, and it can be particularly prevalent in some very serious offences, like sexual offences or like fraud. And, for example, the British Crime Survey came out recently and talked about only 14% of fraud cases were reported to the police over there. And I just wonder, is that a problem for the guards in terms of decisions made around resourcing of investigations, particularly in those areas which are low levels of reporting?
Yeah, so certainly I think that the two areas of and I think as you rightly say, I mean, well reported and across many jurisdictions is around sexual crime and economic crime. So for me, definitely the more important of the two is around the sexual and crime. So we, as you know, we have done lots and lots, and again, I won't go through all the things because I know I've spoken about them at many police authority meetings before, around the work we're trying to do to encourage victims to come forward. So that's definitely on the sexual crime. So definitely really worrying for us that there's victims out there, and domestic violence exactly the same. People are not coming forward. And we know even when they do come forward, there's been many incidents before they come to us. But again, like I said, we've spoken about this many times. The economic crime one, you know, bearing in mind everything that we've said in the last few minutes around the volumes and how difficult they are, having said that, it's still important for us to have a really good understanding of some of the larger frauds and some of the examples that Angela gave. It's really important for us to have a good understanding of what organised crime are doing and some of the methodologies they're using, the MOs they're using. So if people are victims of fraud, you know, of course we want them to come forward to us. And, you know, sometimes the reality is for particular individual cases, we may not get a criminal resolution to it, but it could certainly point us in the right direction around a new MO where we can actually warn members of the public, we can be proactive around it. So it's really important for us that we get an understanding from the public what's going on. Obviously we would have a really good idea ourselves, but sometimes that's really important. And like I say, to target those leaders of the organised crime groups, it's really good for us to have an understanding of the extent they're operating in this jurisdiction.
Okay, and we understand that the deployment of personnel, when decisions have been made about where people will be deployed, that the level of crime in the area is part of the consideration there. And given that we all have an understanding of the under-reporting in some crime types, is that an issue then for decisions about deployment?
Yeah, so what I would say is there's obviously a number of ways how we determine where we're going to deploy people. So the crime statistics is only one of the metrics, and in that, obviously, economic crime is only one of the metrics of all the crime trends that we look at, and I think for us, it's the community safety ones that are actually some of the more important ones in that. And of course, I'm not downplaying economic crime whatsoever, but for us, you know, we're interested in an area where we can put uniform presence where they can be a deterrence, because even in an area, you can imagine, no matter how many uniform guards you put in place, that may never stop economic crime, because the economic crime is going on, as Angela said earlier, it's going on often online. So it doesn't matter, to some extent, it doesn't matter how many uniforms you put into a particular area. So for us, we would generally look at crimes that really affect daily life. So we're looking at obviously robberies, assaults, thefts, burglaries, domestic violence. So they're the more important ones, I would say, around determining where we allocate people. I hope that sort of...
Yeah, thanks for that. Clear. Last one then, I just want to touch on the fear of crime. And the fear of crime figures have trended upwards over recent years. And I just wonder, what can Garda Síochána do to address fear of crime in communities? Yeah,
well look, I mean, what I've always said as the Garda Commissioner is, I mean, Ireland is a safe country. It's absolutely a safe country. And I know the Minister for Justice, Home Affairs and Migration has said the same. All the research shows that outside on Garda Síochána. I'm not saying this is on Garda Síochána's viewpoint. And, you know, the Global Peace Index, we're always up towards the top of that, and a whole load of metrics in that. However, that doesn't make much difference, as you rightly say, if there's a perception of fear. So people are afraid. So that's one of the big drivers around our increased visibility. So we certainly know that when there's more visibility of uniform officers on the beat, on the ground, that helps us around fear of crime, and there's obviously also a deterrent effect to it. So that's why we put so much effort into high visibility policing. Again, I've gone through the different areas, and I know Paul mentioned some of them earlier, and Actually, even only yesterday, we met as a senior team around deployments, and we've discussed the next iteration of that, which is going to be very shortly. We're going to be moving to Galway and supplementing actually more into Limerick. It's been so successful down there, so we're going to move to Galway next. So, as again you can see, I mean, it's been really successful. I mean, we know from a whole range of ways we're looking at it that people certainly feel safe in the areas where we put in more HVBs. So, look, the fear of crime is certainly something that's high up on our agenda, and that's one of the ways we're trying to do it. I mean, the other thing, we certainly in our messaging, we try to reassure people. And then I think the burglaries is another important one, particularly in the rural areas, because a lot of this HVB stuff at the moment is concentrated in cities and busy urban areas. But I think the burglaries is one. When you talk about fear of crime, particularly people who are in isolated rural communities, I mean, they're afraid. Some people are afraid in their homes. But I think when you look at the work that we've done around burglary, even the 4-year trend, I know earlier we spoke about just the 3 months and then the year on year, but if you look at the 4-year trend, like it's down 10% burglary. And the work that we've done on Operation Thor, I mean, that for me has been one of our absolute standout operations, and it doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't get a lot of the publicity of the big drugs cases, the organised crime cases, or the international cartels. It doesn't get that sort of attention, but it's had real effect on the ground around burglaries. Like, some of the percentage drops in some divisions are absolutely huge, and that's why taking this organisational approach to burglary.
Thanks for it. Very, very briefly, have you got the resources to continue the policing like you see in the centre city that you talk about moving into Galway, the high visibility policing?
Yeah.
Can you continue to resource that?
Yeah, I mean, as long as we continue the pipeline of recruits in. So, I mean, again, and I think it's probably even useful, I'm sure the authority know, but it's probably useful for the public to know. I mean, how this actually works is, yesterday we met as a senior executive team. We have 200 people coming out from the college, so we're getting around, like I say, around 200 every quarter. Yesterday we met and we decided how we'd split up that 200. So there's a range of things that we have to do with that, and there's loads of different competing demands. And again, as I said at your event the other day, it's actually one of the great things about policing here in Ireland. People want to see more guards in their areas. There's no one that doesn't want to see more guards. And that's not the same in every jurisdiction. So for us, it's just managing where we're putting them. And but I think really, to answer your question, as long as we keep that pipeline going and the government keep supporting us on that, we'll be able to continue to roll out.
Thanks very much, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Mick. Just building on that, we had a very detailed discussion at our morning meeting about, I suppose, some of the wider strategic implications of, both in terms of the underreported crime and I suppose the changing profile of crime. We were reflecting, which we've heard certainly in Cork and Wexford, about domestic violence, which is obviously a very ancient crime, but how it's being perpetrated in new ways due to technology. And also then we'd have kind of newer crimes like the sharing of intimate images and that. But our reflections this morning, which we will pick up probably at the July meeting when we go down to Templemore, is about the long-term implications for the workforce planning. So, it's a feature around the world that police services are reflecting on how we get those people with specialist skills, particularly in the cyber area. Huge competition with the private sector, may not come through the college, but then there's obviously a huge training piece. So certainly something we can't get into today, but we'll explore at another meeting. So I'm going to hand over now to Frida, who's going to have some questions on the culture audit and resulting issues.
By saying, thank you, Tony. As a relatively new commissioner, still in your first year, you have a unique opportunity to place your stamp on cultural reform, and the authority has noted already your candour and openness. And how will you bring that to impact on cultural reform, and what other approaches might you adopt?
Thanks very much, and thanks for the question. So look, I think what I've done since I took over last September, so I set out very clearly right from the start, I mean, what I expected of guards in our organisation, set that out really clearly. And, as I said earlier, we meet as a senior leadership team every single week. We meet as an executive team as well every single week. And I think the tone that I'm certainly trying to set at those senior meetings is around things we need to improve around culture. And I think, well, I certainly hope you'll see I've been very open around that and very candid around where I see some of the problems are with the culture of Garda Síochána. However, having said that, I think it's also really important to say that there's some really, really good elements of the culture of our organisation. And again, I mentioned some of them at the event the other day. The way Garda Síochána is completely embedded in communities all around the country. And certainly the way guards go far beyond what's expected of them in their routine duties. What they do even out of work, off duty, I think is absolutely fantastic. And then our own culture internally, you know, I think there's some fantastic elements of that around how we support our people, around the camaraderie, around all sorts of things, our charity work, the money we raise, things like Little Brew Heroes. I mean, so there's some, so I know like at forums like the PCSA, we often focus on the negatives around culture, but for me, and I think some of them are actually reflected in our cultural report that I know we're probably going to talk about. So for me, you know, there's a lot of positives around the culture. So I try not to just concentrate on the areas we need improvement, but like, you know, one of the things that I've done is certainly bring together some of the really important management teams. So for example, the chief superintendents. So certainly we met them all last week in Templemore, the executive team, and we've met them, I've met them as a group a couple of times before that. And for me, that's really useful, really, to set out what I expect of them and of their teams, because they're the ones really they're obviously the ones running the divisions with all the people in them. So again, that's been my sort of direction of travel with it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Tony, who's much more used than I am to public speaking. Coming to the audit itself, it was fairly much static from the 2022 audit, and that was something I wanted to dig down into. So we had, as you say, some very good scores in it about supportive leadership from line managers, high performance expectations from line managers, moderately high average of job satisfaction. But you also had things remaining at a low level that I'm wondering, are you disappointed that didn't move in that period of time? And those include perceived organisational support, perceived senior leadership effectiveness, and moral and disengagement, which remains at a very low average level. So I suppose it's that we knew this in 2022, it's still there in 2025. Were you disappointed with that?
Look, I think when we met the team behind the cultural audit, so we spent a lot of time going through the outcomes of it. We've obviously a piece of work where we've taken those now, and under Paul's leadership, we're trying to turn the dial on some of the ones you've spoken about. But I think for me, I think overall, no, I wouldn't say disappointment. Like, I mean, I think it certainly shows for me, most people, both guard, and it's, you know, I think it's important to show the results aren't the same for sworn guards and for Garda staff. There is a nuance between them. But I think in both cohorts, which I think is a real positive, generally we've good job satisfaction, and generally people have a real sense that they're doing important work, and they have that real buy-in into it. And then around intention, people, you know, talking about leaving, or I think, again, that's low. And I think that's really important, because a lot of the narratives out there publicly are, you know, we've got a retention crisis, people want to leave the organisation, where it's not true. So I think if you even look at that, okay, so people are certainly, they're motivated, they've got a sense of they're doing really good work. I think that's really important. And then when we look at the ones that I'd certainly be more concerned around, and the ones that I think it's important for us to deal with, is the hindrance stressors. So these are the things that are making it difficult for people to do their jobs. And the other thing is, sorry.
That was one of my next questions, so I'd like you to dive a little bit deeper into the hindrance stressors, because we were seeing things like lack of availability of cars, difficulty starting the computer. We referred to the ANPR earlier, and how that had been a problem for people. So they were getting to their desks and feeling that and sort of high sickness rates as well. They were getting to their desks and feeling that they didn't have the tools that they needed to do the job. So I'd be interested in hearing what specifically you're doing about analysing and addressing the hindrance stressors.
And I think certainly if anyone was to replay the first press conference that I did on the 1st of September, one of the things that I actually mentioned was hindrance stressors. And I said, look, it's my job as the Garda Commissioner to start removing these. So we are certainly doing that, and there's a whole range of programmes that we're working on, and we're really pushing forward hard on to improve the lot, particularly of our frontline men and women. So when I look at all the work we're doing around ICT, the huge programme of investment that we have around that to improve some of the things that you're talking about, things like body-worn cameras, taser, vehicles. We've more vehicles in the organisation than we've ever had. The quality of them, and I'm sure even, we spend a lot of time looking at this, but I'm sure even the members of the public have noted the improvement in vehicles, the visibility of them. And things like, and I know we've spoken about it here before a few times, things like IMS. Like we've certainly, this year and last year, we've certainly looked at things like IMS, and where people are saying there's a problem with them, or there's a hindrance to it, or it's not efficient, we've certainly made big changes to it. So we're certainly receptive around some of those things. So for me, I said I'd start doing that, and my view is, myself and particularly the team in charge of all the different areas, we're certainly doing that. We're making significant strides, and I mean, we're very fortunate. I think at the moment we have a supportive department and a supportive government around investment, and things like people's workplaces. So I mean, Paul mentioned just one aspect of it there. Work we're going to start doing around 60 public offices or public areas and stations. But I mean, some of the building works that we're doing, the capital investment programme, some of the big stations that we're going to have coming online, and this infrastructure investment, some of the quality of the stations now we're delivering. Fantastic project just started in Macroom. We've Portlaoise well underway. Castle Banningham is nearly finished. So we have some really big ones, and we've some other ones coming on into the pipeline. So I think all those type of things we're doing, we're trying to really improve and remove some of those stressors. Like other things, even like uniform. I mean, we're making changes now, and I think, and I certainly don't mean to say that I'm responsible for this, but certainly we've made a lot of decisions around things, and we're driving them forward now. So I mean, things like uniform, like when it comes to our attention now, something needs to be improved. We're making changes really quick, and we're getting forward on them, and I can give a whole range of examples on them. But again, I think members of the public will probably actually see that now. They'll see that in the quality of equipment, the quality of uniform, quality of vehicles, mobility devices, we're improving all the time. So like I say, I'm absolutely, I'm not saying everything is perfect. Of course it's not. There's lots of other issues, RDMS and things like this, how people log on. But we're improving those things all the time. And I think, particularly as a management team, I think we're being very practical around some of the things. And I think even with, ICT, things like that, I think our whole focus now, everyone's focus nearly around our senior leadership team is on that front line and improving everything we can so they can do a better job. So look, I'm very positive around some of the things we're doing. And look, the other thing I think that the cultural survey shows, it shows people don't feel, a lot of people don't feel the public, are fully supportive of them. There's things like that. They certainly show that it's a hard job. They certainly show, there's lots of stressors, particularly on the sworn Garda side. You can see people are finding it a difficult job. You know, so I mean, that's really come out in the cultural audit. But I mean, the reality of policing, and you know, we obviously say it's a job worth doing, but at the same time, it is a tough job for those people on the front line. It's not easy. So I think that the audit certainly reflects all that.
And certainly coming into it and wanting to address and you know, having a plan for it to address each of the elements, because obviously you're looking for continuous cultural improvement. You know, whether you already have a high or an average score, you would be continuing to do that. But I'm interested in the kind of divorce at the moment between how the guards on the ground perceive leadership and perceive the effectiveness of leadership, and what you were doing to address that specifically, and how, when you are making organisational policy, you are addressing culture and the impact of culture when those policies are being put into place. So I'd be interested in hearing how you're managing those specific pieces. That's the bit of the disconnect between what the guards are saying on the ground and how they are seeing what attempts you're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks. And I suppose I should have said at the start, like the other thing about this audit, and you asked me what was disappointing around it. I mean, the response rate. So we're looking, everything we're talking about, it's about a quarter of the people we're talking about who's responded to it. So we've obviously a whole 3/4 of people who didn't respond to it. So we certainly have to take that into account. But I think around your actual question.
And sorry, if I can interrupt, just on that, because your response rate was lower this time than it was last time. What do you read into that?
Yeah, like I don't know. I mean, we had obviously spoke to the people who have run this, and what was interesting is they have obviously run this compared to a lot of UK forces, where it's the University of Durham did this. So I mean, it's not inconsistent with a lot of them. Now for us, I suppose there's a couple of things in it. I mean, you can look at it in a number of ways. I mean, is it people are disillusioned with it about if they put it in and there's no change? That's obviously one thing that we're concerned around. Or is it more that people they're okay with their situations? Now, like the only thing is, I would say, to answer your question, what we're doing as senior leadership, we're certainly trying to be far more transparent around our decision making and what we're doing, and explaining what we're doing and explain the reasons why. So for example, even the EU presidency coming up now, starting next week, we've been very clear around what we expect of people, you know, our operational orders around it. So I'm spending a lot more time trying to explain to people what we're doing. We've been involved in a lot of negotiations around things like travel and sub-schemes, and even with those, I mean, we're trying to message far clearer out to the organisation about some of the things we're doing. So that's one thing we're certainly trying to do to address that. But I'm just conscious, Frida, that Paul, this is obviously in Paul's area, and he and his team have probably done or not probably, they are doing a lot of work on this. So I might just hand over to Paul, if you don't mind, just to see, is there anything he wants to pick up on that you've asked, if that's okay?
That's fine. And if you're handing over to Paul, I'd like you to consider as well, when you're responding to us, just how will you measure when there's been real shift and change in culture, and what are your future plans for further audits, and how will you use them? So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks, Commissioner. So we've looked at this very closely. It's the second audit that we've commissioned over a 3-year period, and you're right at the outset, there hasn't been much change in that time. There was 9 areas measured in the cultural audit, and I looked at what's realistically achievable for us to do in the next 18 months. So for the remainder of 26 and for 27, we're not going to get through those 9 areas, but we prioritised 3 of the different areas. One is perceived organisational support, perceived senior leadership effectiveness, and the hindrance stressors that you mentioned earlier on. So developed 3 projects in relation to those 3 areas to try and make some tangible progress and move the dial a bit. In relation to the first one, the organisational support, I suppose one of the main projects that we're going to do is we're going to do a complete review of our acknowledgement piece, in other words, our commendations. We call them EPW1s internally. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to extend that to all personnel. At the moment they're only eligible to sworn officers, and we're going to include Garda staff in that as well, and we're going to change how we do that. We're going to make more of an event around the awarding of commendations to try and improve morale in those areas and bring in external stakeholders, community leaders and that type of thing. So that'll be done, the strategic lead on that will be the Chief Corporate Officer, and the business owner will be the Executive Director HRPD. And we will put a policy and procedure in place to support best-in-class employee recognition system. That's essentially what it's going to be under that audit area. The other audit area is the hindrance stressors that you mentioned earlier on. And when I drilled down into it, it was very clear that, you know, a lot of the challenges are with frontline supervisors are really, it's a very demanding role, and I would call them the backbone of the organisation, our sergeants and our supervisors, and I think we really need to listen to those. I firmly believe that the sergeants and frontline supervisors are the culture keepers of the organisation. So I'm going to lead out on that as strategic lead, with the ED strategy and transformation being the business owner, and the target audience will be those frontline supervisors. And I suppose we want to have a full body of research where we really understand what they're facing on an hourly basis. They can talk about hindrance stresses, but we want to, what do they look like? Paint a very clear picture so that we can work towards relieving them of those stressors. Implementation and measures, clear recommendations. We want the cohort of frontline leaders to feel heard. We're going to engage with our rep bodies in that regard. We want those who have an increased capacity to develop their own leadership. We want better personnel engagement between sergeants and members. We want basically the sergeants to feel empowered and supported. We spoke earlier on about performance and roads policing and a reluctance to challenge. We want to change that, and we think that this particular project will help us in that regard. The other area is around the effective leadership, and this project will be led by Deputy Policing and with an AC to be the business owner. And the target audience is the operational leaders at superintendent and chief superintendent level, and leaders across the administrative and policy sphere in Garda headquarters at AP and principal officer level. So the first thing we have to do is identify what good leadership looks like, and we will use the cultural audit in that regard. Where are we failing to thrive from a leadership perspective? What good practice looks like nationally and internationally, and we all know which particular leaders are very much appreciated, and we want to see what we can learn from what they do that we can transfer to others. Again, we're going to develop a suite of proposals and communicate and implement, and the desired outcomes of that will be, you know, enhanced leadership development, leaders feeling more supported, personnel feeling better supported by the organisational leaders, and a positive change in the perception of leadership from members of staff. So essentially it's about looking at what's working and what's not working, and building a suite of proposals around that and implementing them. So they're the three areas. We have to be realistic in our approach over the next 18 months. We're not going to get through the 9 areas that were measured by the cultural audit, but if we go in another 3 years for a new cultural audit, that means we have an additional 18 months to pick the next priorities and work on those. And I'm happy to come back and report to the authority at future meetings on the progress of those initiatives.
I have 2 questions on that. Are you planning any kind of interim snapshots after the first 3 that you've looked at, just to see if the progress is actually being made? The second question I have is, if I walk into my local Garda station and scan that QR code and give my feedback, what happens to it?
Well, again, it comes back to the project team that I'm in charge of. So obviously we're starting small with 60 stations. I think we've 564 stations. That QR code feedback is going to be instrumental in how we move forward with this with the rest of the estate. Look, we know that there's very positive engagement done in stations all around the country every day. But if there's anyone failing to meet that high standard that we expect from our people, well, then this is going to highlight it. this is going to put forward best practice with that first contact of people at the front desk. I'm fairly hopeful that the project on the first contact will give us good insights as to where we can improve. But the setting is going to be very important. On the other piece around the first part of your question there, I genuinely think that the hindrance stressors, we're going to have to remove them as much as we can from our people on the ground. They're very real. You know, the automation where we can, simplifying more streamlined processes, structures, systems, that's the end game result for us, to take away those hindrance stressors. But as I said, there's a body of work to do over the next 18 months, so I'll have to come back. On an interim basis, before the end of this year, I might have a better insight into it.
Thank you very much. Back to the Chair for any supplementary questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Frida. And it's interesting you say that, DC Clear, about automation, because actually we were discussing that this morning in relation to, fantastic to see the first contact initiatives in the physical space, but I think the issue of the use of technology and how we could improve that is certainly something that we're interested in, and I'm sure you are. So just before we leave the area of culture, Joe, I know you had a supplementary question, so I might hand to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Commissioner, and your team. Just in relation to culture, I suppose there's nothing better than a real life situation to discuss and to ask your opinion on. But 2 weeks ago, the High Court Judge, former High Court Judge Michael White, produced his report of the Commission of Inquiry into child sexual abuse in the southeast area, which is probably better known as the Kennelly Report. Now, it raised very serious issues, very disturbing issues, particularly in relation to the culture of the Gardaí and into the culture of other service providers. So the question I have is, to what extent has that culture changed, and how has it changed over the last 40 years? Because this was reflected in the findings over a period of 4 decades, and a lot of it continued on right through that. And, you know, one of the greatest difficulties that come up is to get victims to actually come forward. But when victims actually do come forward, can they have any confidence that the investigation will proceed as they expect and moving on into the future? So I'd appreciate it if you would give us your opinions on that.
Thanks for the question. And what I'd say, first of all, the particular set of cases in the Commission, there are obviously some of them are subject still to legal action, so I'd be sort of precluded publicly speaking too much about the particular set of circumstances, but I can certainly, I think, still answer your question. What I would, and of course I should say, we have already, and I've already publicly said, you know, we fell far short of where we should have in that, obviously, and we issued a statement the day or the following day in relation to this. But what I would say, certainly, if we move forward to contemporary times, and I can give an example of some other similar type situations and how we've dealt with it. So you will be familiar, and again, I won't delve too much into the detail of it, but you'll be familiar of it from public reporting about some of the unfortunate sexual abuse cases, both in schools on the south side of Dublin. And again, you'll be all familiar with them, but how we approach those, we put in place immediately. These allegations came to us, and it was obvious that there was a number of victims in this. We immediately put dedicated teams in place for those. We made public statements, asked people to come forward to us, which they did. And when those victims came forward of historical sexual abuse in these settings, they were dealt with absolutely professionally. They were given all the supports they should be given. We dedicated experts from Garda National Protective Services Bureau to oversee the investigations, and then local detectives working with them. And some of these investigations have led to prosecutions and convictions. So I think even when you look at those and how we've dealt with those now, whole multitude of convictions around a number of significant perpetrators. So I think, I mean, that for me, that's the real evidence of how we deal with things nowadays. So look, I hope that answers your question. And I mean, I think some of these cases, these historical cases, obviously what happened is absolutely horrendous to some of these victims. And certainly in Garda Síochána, when it becomes apparent to us that their cases and they're either in an institution or school or educational setting, whatever that is, I mean, they very quickly make it up to senior management. I mean, it is not the case that would be dealt with locally. I mean, very, very quickly, if a series of cases like that come into the attention of Garda Síochána, very, very quickly, I mean, that would come up to Assistant Commissioner level. The like of Angela and her team in GNPSB or the regional AC would become aware of a series of cases like that and would assign all the resources to it. And again, you know, I think, you know, this thing where, and again, I don't mean to talk about particular cases, but there's certainly sometimes fear that if there are people in authority, that they will be shielded in some way, protected. And I could list off, you know, numerous cases where we have been involved in investigations where a whole range of persons in authority have been prosecuted, you know, right from members of Garda Síochána, politicians, members of the judiciary, legal professionals, you know, and I only picked those four, but I mean, there's a whole range of persons in authority that we have prosecuted people in relation to. So I think certainly in this era we are in, if there's a report made to us, there's no hiding place for those perpetrators. I mean, we'll investigate them, whoever they are. And again, I think that's been evidenced. I mean, there's numerous cases that we could cite in recent years in relation to that.
Thanks, Commissioner. That's fine.
Yeah, thanks. Chair, I wonder, could I just ask that if the committee's happy that Sarah Parsons be excused, I think, her item agenda?
Of course.
Yeah,
Thanks very much, Sarah, for your input. So I'm going to multitask now, Commissioner, because before my elevation to the chair temporarily, I also had questions. So I'll move into that, and I might ask Helen Hall to give me the elbow nudge if I'm going over time. So, you know, we're running out of time a little bit, but we didn't want to ignore the homicide review assessment of implementation of recommendations, which was released to the public via our website this morning. So, as you'd be aware, this is a long-standing matter for oversight, which dates back to the former policing authority. And as a result of some issues relating to the classification of sudden deaths and homicide, a homicide investigation review team was set up inside Garda Síochána. So there were 21 recommendations for this, and recently the PCSA had an assessment of the implementation of these recommendations. So I just wanted to acknowledge as well that obviously this report doesn't deal with individual cases, it's systemic. But whatever happens with a sudden, unexpected or suspicious death, it's the loss of a person, and we're all bereft, and the family and community are as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And that's why it is so important, of course, that we get things right in this area. So as I mentioned, there's been significant progress in implementing these recommendations. And I noted that at the Policing Priorities event on Tuesday, you described the delivery of service in this area as outstanding. So I wanted to ask you to reflect, we haven't got a lot of time, but maybe the most impactful change that you've seen as a result of this work.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So obviously when this came to light, I mean, this started a very, very important piece of work for us. And as you rightly said, previously the Policing Authority had attention to this area. So there's 48 cases involved in this, and I think it's important to say from the outset that whatever the recommendations and changes were, and some of them were significant, the outcome of any of the cases would not have changed. I mean, that's the final assessment of us in this, and the recommendations that are in place, as you rightly said, we've made a lot of progress in relation to them. And AC Willis and her team in organised crime have been the ones instrumental dealing with all this, obviously regularly briefing me and my predecessor Drew on it. So I'd like to hand over to Angela, who can bring you through some of the detail, and will certainly be able to address that question for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, AC Willis. And I think we'll get into both positive and negative, but I just put that question again about kind of what's the most impactful thing that's come out, because acknowledging, I think out of the 21, all but 6 have been progressed. So interested in the most impactful one.
Thanks, Chair. From our perspective, the most important impact arising out of the work that was undertaken by the Homicide Investigation Review Team, I think, is that standardisation and the increased standard in the quality of homicide investigations and the recording of our data around homicide investigations. And just to reiterate what the Commissioner has said, while we absolutely acknowledge we had shortfalls in relation to the quality of the data, the outcome of any of those 41 investigations that were reviewed did not change. Yes, we needed to update our information on our information systems, and we did have, deficiencies, as I said. But I think that standardised approach and the I suppose appreciation of the importance of data by our members on the ground, and particularly by our supervisors, I think that is probably the most fundamental outcome of the work that has been undertaken. And I suppose that appreciation of the impact that not having due regard to the importance of data quality can have on the ultimate investigation.
Great, and we very much acknowledge that progress. So I think there are about 6 recommendations outstanding, and a couple of examples would be around the rollout of the Property and Exhibits Management System, the PEMS, and the finalisation of a policy relating to where a death is classed as a non-crime incident. So I wonder, could you reflect, or the Commissioner as appropriate, how will these last recommendations be progressed, and could you give an example of how they're being progressed?
Yeah, so I might start with the classification of the incidents and the policy. So we've had significant engagement, as you will know, with the CSO, also with our own ICT, with the Homicide Investigation Review Team. We started off with 16 categories, potential categories that a death could be recorded under. So we've done significant work, obviously with the relevant stakeholders, to try and streamline that and make it a simpler process. Simultaneously, we're updating our policy, as you alluded to, and that policy is at a very advanced stage at this stage. So we're literally getting definitions for we're down to 9 categories. We were getting the very detailed definitions in relation to each of those 9 categories and what's appropriate to record under each category. So that work is actually, there's a meeting today about that. We're going to have one final engagement with the CSO to ensure that the CSO is satisfied with our approach. There are some categories that will be removed. There are other categories that will be reassigned to other areas. For example, road traffic deaths will be categorised under road traffic as opposed to under a homicide category. And obviously, if that becomes a homicide or becomes a suspicious death investigation, it can move across. But I suppose we've had a lot of work done in relation to this and trying to make it as simplified as possible for the member on the ground. And to the Commissioner's point earlier, all of our policies, we're very mindful of what does that mean for the member on the ground, the frontline member, the frontline supervisor. So the policy, I would anticipate, will be complete, ready for consideration by the Executive in the next number of weeks. Don't want to put an exact time on it, but I would imagine Certainly by the end of the summer, we should have that updated policy. But even notwithstanding that, there's a senior investigating officer training programme on currently as we sit here. And the Chief Superintendent in the Garda National Bureau of Criminal Investigation is talking to the new SIOs that are being trained about the policy and about the changes and explaining all that. So we will have obviously a piece of training around it when we issue the policy, just updated briefing. Then the other piece that's really important, I think, from the perspective of the work undertaken by the Homicide Investigation Review Team is that the inclusion in the policy of the requirement to undertake reviews of all deaths that have been subject of a state post-mortem and which didn't end up being a suspicious death, that we're writing into the policy a requirement on the Divisional Serious Incident Investigation Team to task the review of that case out to an independent SIO within the region. And I suppose that replicates the work that the Homicide Investigation Review Team has undertaken, because as you'll appreciate, this is work that's been undertaken in addition to the day job. So therefore we want to streamline it in as part of policy. It just becomes part of regular inspection review. And that review will be undertaken on a quarterly basis, and then there'll be an annual review also, which will be informed back to Deputy Commissioner Police and Operations.
That's great, thank you. And that actually answered one of my questions in advance, because I think I was going to get into that about, I think it's recommendation 18. But I just wanted to go back, I suppose, to that wider question of peer review, which was obviously something that has been discussed a lot with our predecessors. And my understanding is that in some comparable jurisdictions that a peer review would automatically be put into place after an investigation goes outside of a certain time frame. And that seems to me at least to be quite a sensible thing. So is that one of the things that will be implemented, or what's the view on that?
So there will be mandatory peer review in relation to investigations, exactly the investigations that fell into the categories here. So deaths that occurred which didn't end up in a full murder investigation, if you like. So they will be mandatory where the post-mortem has been undertaken by the state pathologist. So, for example, where there were initial suspicions that it may be a suspicious death, and then the outcome of the post-mortem informed our direction, and then it ends up being a coroner's investigation as opposed to a criminal investigation. We haven't introduced the time-bound reviews, and I suppose we have considered it, but many of our murder investigations are, suspicious deaths investigations. They have become quite complex because data, and particularly digital data, becomes a key component of the investigation. And there are delays in accessing that. There can be delays. We might have to enter into mutual legal assistance requests, etc. So and I should also point out that actually in relation to suspicious deaths and murders, our detection rate is quite significant. So we don't see a requirement to undertake reviews at this point. That's not to say we won't change our mind, and we will keep it under consideration. But the way our direction of travel at the minute is that we will obviously any case can be reviewed at the request of the Divisional Serious Incident Management Team, and that request can come into the Serious Crime Review Team. We are now training peer review officers across the country. We have 58 trained at present. We actually have a training course on in the college now as well. We have another one in July, and we're hoping, depending on the demands of the EU presidency, we might fit a final one in by the end of the year. So that peer review capacity will be across all of the divisions. And then obviously we have the Serious Crime Review Team as well. We have a mechanism, a very clear mechanism how that review can be commissioned, and we're actually updating that policy as well, because that's that policy requires updating. So I suppose we're not going to go through the time-bound ones just for now, but we will keep it under consideration.
Thank you. And I suppose just picking up on what you say about the increasing complexity of these investigations and also what you were saying about the increased volume of training, and that was something certainly that we're going to look into when we go down to Templemore in July. But I suppose in terms of, you know, being a single police service in a fairly small jurisdiction, how do you ensure that you're benchmarking against, I suppose, global standards, and particularly in these times of increased technological complexity, as you say?
Yeah, so I suppose we would have a lot of international engagement, as the authority would be aware of. We engage very significantly with Europol. We send people to what's called CPOL training courses, which are international training courses. So they're training with their international peers. We obviously, in relation to the digital evidence, we have established our cyber hubs across the regions. We obviously have the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau also, and they're available and provide assistance in all of the major investigations that we're undertaking, not just where there is a death, but in any other major investigation, there would be an element, a digital expert provided. And again, we, even in that space, we ran an online child exploitation. Europol ran that course in the Garda College earlier this year in May, April or May. But that is the first time that outside of Europol that course has been delivered in any country. So again, we have really committed investigators here, and we have them trained to that. They provide training in other jurisdictions as well, and because of the confidence that Europol had in our trainers, they brought that course to the Garda College in Templemore. So I suppose that's an example of where we're constantly linking in with our international peers, and we're benchmarking against that international best practice.
If I may, Angie, if I could just add to that, I think if you look at the homicide figures over the last 4 years, they're down 28%. So, and you know, as we've mentioned before, last year there was not one homicide by firearm here in Ireland. And I mean, I've met my peers around Europe. They cannot believe that statistic. They actually cannot believe that statistic. So the public should know we're certainly going in the right direction. As Angela said earlier, we have good detection rates around them. The other thing is my genuine belief around this is our level of our homicide investigations would stand up to any jurisdiction. And having said that, we certainly don't live in a vacuum here in Ireland. We look at what happens in other countries, and particularly with some of the higher profile cases that would collapse in other countries, other jurisdictions, particularly ones close to us. We look at all those and we go through them and we say, okay, if we had that same set of circumstances here, what would we have done, or would that have happened here? So we certainly do that. Actually, Angela, myself and Paul, in our various different roles, I mean, we have worked extensively and travelled extensively and worked with other jurisdictions. And I certainly think, particularly around homicide investigation, and as I said it at your event the other day, I think we do very high level. And I mean, if you look, some of the trials that go on, I mean, there's some, you know, there's obviously regularly ones on and people can follow them, the public can follow them. And we just see the professionalism of some of our officers who present at those cases, and some of the really technical stuff around CCTV, phones, all sorts of things now, really complex interviewers, interviewing people with vulnerabilities, how we deal with that, interviewing children. All these things have been through really complex court cases. And again, and you will see this often actually in some of these big high profile cases, the judges actually at the end of the cases will compliment the Garda investigation for the standard they have got to. And you know, I would just say, you know, any member of the public, if you even read or follow in the media, just the level of attention that we go to around some of these cases. Like, we literally leave no stone unturned in homicide investigations. And going back to this review, I mean, the thing about deaths that we attend to, homicides are very few. Like on Garda Síochána, attend many scenes where unfortunately people have lost their lives, but there's a whole variety of ones that we would go to, which are all very, very difficult for families, but homicide are only a very small amount of them. But like I said, we've done a lot of work over the last, I would say, decade, improving our capacity, our capabilities, and it's one area, and I know Mick asked me earlier what would keep me awake at night, but homicide investigations certainly wouldn't. Now, of course, sometimes, we see weaknesses, we have to improve them, of course. I'm not saying everything is 100% perfect, but it's actually one area that I think Garda Síochána is very strong on.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'll put my chair hat back on now, and I might ask Helen Hall just to confirm or deny that there are any actions from this meeting.
I've just recorded one, which is the updated policy by the end of the summer, I think, Angela, you said, on the classification. So maybe we might schedule that for a discussion with you, a brief discussion in September if needed. So thanks very much.
And I think it's fitting that we've had a lot of discussion about training today, and I was particularly interested as in a former life I worked in a police college, I suppose, about that circle of the experience coming back and the international experience coming back to the training. So our next meeting will be in July, where we're taking a trip to Templemore, and we're very much looking forward to that and learning more about the training. So our next public meeting of the authority will be in Cavan in October. So we'll be looking forward to the engagements that we have there. And so just finally, just acknowledging, as we have said a couple of times today, so the EU presidency is starting soon, and I know there's a huge amount of preparation has gone on, and I suppose wishing you a very smooth 6 months, and to acknowledge all the work that you'll be doing, but that I'm sure every member of Garda Síochána and every Garda employee will be doing to keep us safe during that period. Thank you.